All right, good afternoon. Ms. O'Brien, are you ready to go back on the record?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Very good. All right, we are back from break and back on the record. We left off with we were about to start with the site's project authorities cross-examination of Messrs. Burke and Wilson. Before we do that, I just thought I'd get a quick time check on cross-examination. So, Mr. Ferguson, how long do you expect your cross-exam to take?
I'd say about an hour to an hour and a half for Mr. Wilson, and then Ms. Chester will have some questions for Mr. Burke. And I'll let her respond.
Expect about an hour for cross-examination of Mr. Burke.
All right, so that's about 2 to 2.5 hours. Makes sense. Ms. Mandel Rice for the state water contractors, will you have cross-exam for Mr. Burke or Mr. Wilson?
We may have, and I apologize, my camera's not aligned. We may have cross-examination for both witnesses, but we'll limit it to questions that have not been asked by the site's authority. So I can't predict it, but my guess is about 20 minutes.
Very good. And Mr. Sutherland?
Same. Yeah, maybe 30 minutes, but it could be reduced as Mr. Ferguson and Ms. Chester go forward.
Great. And I gather it's Ms. Mitchell for the Bureau. Will you have questions for these witnesses?
I do not anticipate having questions.
All right, we'll circle back, but that sounds good. With that, I will turn the floor over to you, Mr. Ferguson, to start with cross-exam.
Thank you.
This is John Herrick. I just want to say I'm sitting here, but the camera's going to be pointed at them because we're all together rather than separate.
Understood. Thank you, Mr. Herrick.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I can see Mr. Wilson. So Mr. Wilson, my questions are going to be for you, as I just indicated. Good afternoon. Again, my name is Aaron Ferguson. We're counsel for the site's project authority. And I'll be asking you a series of questions regarding your testimony, which is marked as SDWA 81. Okay?
Yes.
Great. I'd like to start on page 9 of your testimony, and at line 23 and continuing on to page 10 through line 4. You state that according to the results reported by Jacobs Engineering, prepared for the site's authority, the only month when there is likely to be additional capacity in the CBD would be October. And during the other months included in the WSIP application, which I think you corrected to August through September, correct?
Yes.
Little or no capacity exists in the CBD to take on additional water. And you further continue by saying that only leaves October for the period that does not flood and is still within the desired window established for funding by WSIP. I assume you see all that language?
Yes.
Great. So it appears you reach the conclusions in these sentences, at least in part, based on the passage on page 9 at lines 16 through 21. Is that correct?
And review of other information. There's another table in the report.
Okay.
So
I'm focused specifically on the language, page 9, lines 16 through 18, which state that the figure illustrates that the 1000 CFS site's reservoir release can be conveyed without causing WSE effects, primarily during the months of April through July and October. Do you see that language?
Yes.
And that's from SDWA 84, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Is it your understanding that the quote unquote figure referred to in the statement I just read refers to figure E3 in SDWA 84? If we need to bring up SDWA 84 and page 2 in particular, we could certainly do that.
Yes, please.
Go to page 2, please. And if we could blow that up, that'd be helpful. Thank you. Yes.
Yes, the table E1 summary of WSE effects on sites volume delivery.
Well, my question relates to the quotation in your testimony on page 9 that starts at line 16 where it says the figure. I'm just trying to get your understanding of which figure that quote is referring to. And I believe that quote comes out of this paragraph right before the table E1. So
Excuse me, the figure is further down in the report, I believe. Yeah.
is it your understanding that it refers to that figure?
Yeah.
E1?
Yes.
Is it your understanding that it may also refer to figure E3? Can we scroll down further, please? Sorry to. So I'm going to ask you again, Mr. Wilson. Sorry to continue to be a little disjointed here, but so your understanding is that the figure in that quotation refers to E1 as opposed to E3?
It's my understanding that it referred to E1, but if you we want to review it again, to see, it should be clear from the document itself.
Okay, well, I think it's important that we're on the same page, so bear with me. If we can go back to page 2, please.
Yeah, look at the text.
And so if we look right in the middle of the paragraph before table E1, you see the sentence that you've quoted in your testimony that says the figure illustrates that the 1000 CFS sites reservoir release can be conveyed without causing WSE effects. You see that?
Yes. So then it would appear to be figure E3.
Okay, great. What is your understanding of the assumed flow rate for sites reservoir releases to the Colusa Basin drain and the study that's documented here in SDWA 84?
It's my understanding the assumed release rate from sites reservoir is 1000 CFS.
And is it your understanding that this study assumes that that's a constant in terms of it's always at 1000 CFS?
Yes.
Okay. In table E1, it identifies the number of days in 4 specific water year types during the months of April through October when the addition of 1000 CFS to the Colusa Basin drain does not result in an exceedance of a specific water surface elevation in the Colusa Basin drain, correct?
Correct. It's the number of days without water surface elevation effects.
And you may have said this when I asked you the question the first time about what supported your conclusions at the bottom of page 9, the top of page 10, but I'll ask specifically with respect to table E1, were your conclusions based in part on the results of this contained in table E1?
Yes.
Okay. The SDWA 84 does note on page 2 that the table, which means table E1 and figure E3, also indicate that site's reservoir can release less than 1,000 CFS many times during the period of April through October to prevent water surface elevation effects. Are you aware of that statement?
Yes.
Okay. So I'd like to focus on figure E3. If we can go down to page 6. And specifically the top graph. And figure E3 contains results for the year 2015, correct, Mr. Wilson?
I believe it shows that if you scroll down a little bit, you can see it. Yes. Yes,
And 2015 was a critical water year, correct?
correct.
And do you know what the Sites Project Authority's anticipated average monthly release rate to the Yola bypass is in critical years in the months of July, August, September, and October?
Can you repeat that?
Do you happen to know what the Sites Project Authority's anticipated release rates to the Yola bypass are for the months of July, August, September, and October in critical water years?
No, I do not.
Okay. So as part of your analysis here, did you review any of the Sites Project Authority's projected release rates to the Yola bypass to make your determinations about whether capacity might exist for such releases?
No, I reviewed the documents that I submitted as evidence.
Okay. Can we bring up AHO 122, please? And then go to PDF page 94. Mr. Wilson, are you familiar with these tables? Have you seen these type of tables before?
Yes.
Okay, would you be able to tell me what page 94 shows? Just generally?
Yes. Yes, it appears to show the releases to the Yola bypass based on both or monthly and based on the exceedance percentages or divided into either exceedance percentages or water year types.
And you recognize this as calcium output for the Sites Project Authority?
Yes.
Okay. And so would you be able to use the output on this page to tell me what Sites is projecting in critical years for the months of July through October in terms of releases to the Yola bypass?
Yes,
You may need to scroll down a little. Yeah.
It's showing 0, 41 and 0.
Okay, so the maximum release rate that sites is projecting in critical years in terms of releases to the Yola bypass is 41 CFS, and that occurs in August, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And is your understanding that the flow rates reflected in AHO 122 here on PDF page 94 are monthly average rates?
Yes, it reads as monthly flow in CFS. So
Okay.
that's
Can we return to SCWA 84, please, and page 6? So, Mr. Wilson, do you agree, based on the results in the top graph here, which we were just looking at, that sites could release water to the Colusa Basin drain at an average rate of 41 CFS in the month of August without causing exceedances of the water surface elevation that was identified as problematic here in SDWA 84?
yes, I would agree and add that the reason why it is not, well, why the channel could carry that capacity or amount of flow is because it's very, very small. And so as I concluded that there just doesn't seem to be the amount of water that was contained in the WSIP application that doesn't seem to be able to convey that amount of water. So 41 CFS over 30 days, you're talking about a 1,000 acre feet, something in that ballpark. You're not talking about a significant amount of water. In the WSIP, they were talking about much larger volumes of water being released to the Yolo bypass and then basing the financial benefits or the public benefits on that volume of water.
Okay. Well, can we return to AHO 122, please? PDF page 94. So the modeling output here, Mr. Wilson, shows that releases are projected to occur at a much higher rate in wet water years, correct?
Yes.
And what are the rates that are shown in August, September, and October for wet water years?
380, 392, and 288.
Okay. So can we return to SDWA 84, please? And is it your understanding that SDWA 84 evaluated the water year 2017?
Yes.
And was was water year 2017 a wet year?
Yes.
Okay. Can we turn to page 20 of this document? I'm sorry, page 31, figure 20. Oh, can we scroll up, please? Mr. Wilson, does figure 20 appear to contain similar information that we just looked at from figure E3, but for the water year 2017, which is a wet water year?
If we scroll down just to make sure. Yes, it is for water year 2017.
Okay. So relying on the top figure or top graphic as part of figure 20, do you agree that sites could release water to the Colusa Basin drain and then the Yola bypass at an average rate of 380 CFS in August without exceeding the specific water surface elevation identified as problematic in the report?
Yes.
Okay. Do you agree that the site's project could release 392 CFS in September without exceeding the specific water surface elevation that the report found as problematic?
Yes.
And do you agree that the site's project could release 288 CFS in the month of October without causing exceedances of the problematic water surface elevation?
Yes.
Okay. So based on the analysis in SDWA 84 and the CalSim modeling results that we've been reviewing for releases to the Yola bypass, do you agree that there would be capacity in the Colusa Basin drain for sites to release the flows necessary to put water into the Yola bypass at the desired flow rates?
I would say there's capacity to put water in the YOLO bypass and the flow rates you're describing. You just said they're necessary flow rates. I don't know if they're necessary, but if the flow rates described in the EIR modeling that you just put up.
In paragraphs, now we can go to your testimony, or that's SDWA 81. In paragraphs 15 through 21, are you suggesting that, and this, I guess I'm focusing specifically on paragraph 19 and then the following paragraphs. So this is on page 11.
Yes.
Are you suggesting that ITP condition 9.2.7, which prohibits SICE releases to the Yola bypass when salmonids are present at the Wallace Weir, and the historic monitoring results for salmonids in the Yola bypass, which you cite in your testimony, is evidence that sites may not realize the benefits to the Yola bypass fishery assumed in the water storage investment program process in October and other months?
Well, the mitigation measure or condition of approval 9.2.7 has significant potential to limit the ability to release in October. And given the channel capacities, October was a month that Jacobs had modeled, significant amounts, I believe in the 50 or 60,000 acre feet to be able to release it. That's if then salmonids were present in October and sites were not able to release that water, then that seemed to me to be a significant reduction in the amount of public benefit they could get and resulting funding and resulting public interest consideration.
Condition 9.2.7 doesn't strictly prohibit releases during the month of October, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so 9.2.7 prohibits releases if fish are present at the Wallace Weir, correct? Releases to the Yola bypass,
Yes.
correct? Okay. And my understanding is the historic modeling results at page 8 of your testimony and figure 4 indicate what appears to be 2 spring run Chinook salmon that were detected in the month of October at the Wallace Weir. Is that correct?
Yes.
Approximately 2.
Yes.
Okay. And this monitoring was conducted over an 11-year period, correct?
Yes. Yes.
So based on these monitoring results over this period of time, do you agree that it's more likely than not that sites will be able to release water to the Yola bypass during the month of October?
I'm not sure it's more likely or less likely than not, but I think that it definitely calls into question the site's ability to release in October.
I just want to be clear, you're basing your opinion solely on the results of this monitoring effort at the Wallace Weir and the Colusa Basin drain. In terms of the potential presence of fish at the Wallace Weir, is that correct?
Yes.
So you're not attempting to offer any opinions related to any sort of specific biological expertise you might have?
That's correct. I don't have
Okay,
specific expertise.
thank you. If we can turn to page 12 of your testimony, Mr. Wilson. At lines 19 through 21, you say that the benefits claimed by sites in the Proposition 1 WISIP process may be less than described in the site's testimony referenced herein, correct?
Yes.
So which testimony are you referring to where you say the site's testimony referenced herein?
The Heron testimony cites 001.
Okay. Can we return to AHO 122, please? And PDF page 94. Mr. Wilson, would you be able to calculate the average annual volume of releases to the YOLO bypass that sites that are shown in these modeling results? Yep.
Yes, that could be calculated.
So using the full simulation period average flow rates, would you be able to make that calculation?
Yes, you could make that calculation using this data.
Do you agree that those flow rates for the full simulation period average would total approximately 37,000 acre-feet if you were to conduct that calculation?
I'd have to work on it with the calculator to give you that amount of accuracy.
Do you have a calculator?
Sure.
I'm just looking for rough.
So you wanted the average, can you repeat what you wanted calculated?
I would like you to calculate, if possible, from the numbers here on page 94, the volume on an average annual basis of sites releases to the YOLO bypass.
Okay.
This is John Herrick. Mr. Ferguson, as he's doing that, are you asking him to average these averages? Is that what we're doing, or are these not averages over a certain time frame?
Well, I'm asking him to calculate the volume equivalent of the long-term averages.
Okay, thank you.
If that helps.
And what would help me at least is after Mr. Wilson gives you his answer, if he could just briefly explain how he performed that calculation. Thank you.
Yeah, so I added up the full simulation period average. Well, yes, let me explain my calculation. In about the middle of the table, there's a row, full simulation period average. So I took the 151 for October plus 245 for August plus 220
September.
for September equals 616. And then that is average monthly flow in CFS. So 1 CFS is equal to 2 acre-feet per day times 30 days, and I get 36,960 acre-feet. Is that close? Didn't you say 37,000 acre-feet?
I asked you, if you agree that it's approximately 37,000 acre-feet.
Yes, so I would agree it's approximately 37,000 acre-feet.
Okay, thank you. And so the value of approximately 37,000 acre-feet is greater than the supply increase to the Yola bypass that was used to determine the total benefits in table 4 of your testimony, correct? For 2030 and for 2070.
I'd have to look at sites 001.
Okay, let's do that.
Above it, above this table that I printed that breaks down what we're looking at.
Okay. Yeah, I apologize for interrupting you. Yeah, let's look at sites 001, please, at page 7. Mr. Wilson, in preparing your testimony, did you review sites 001?
Yes.
Okay, so are you familiar with the table on page 7 here, table 3?
Yes. Can you go down further?
So what is your understanding of what table 3 contains?
It shows the volume of water released to the Yola bypass based on either 2030 hydrology or 2070, which would be future climate change hydrology, using calcium to predict those, and given the results in averages based
And
on
your understanding that oh, excuse me, were you finished?
sorry, based on water year type.
Is it your understanding that the results in table 3 were used to calculate the total benefits that the WSIP program determined could be realized through releases to the Yola bypass?
Yes.
Okay. So with respect to the 23 results, the 37,000 acre foot average annual release that you calculated from the authority's modeling would be greater than the long-term average increase used to determine the potential WISP benefits in 2030, correct?
Slightly greater, but yes.
And would the modeled releases to the Yola bypass of approximately 37,000 acre feet on a long-term average basis be greater than the projected increase for 2070 here in table 3?
Yes.
Okay. So based on the modeling results we reviewed and SDWA 84 and the potential capacity constraints that we've reviewed, sites may be able to release water in quantities that are necessary to achieve the supply increases that were projected for the total benefits that were determined through the WISA process for the authority, correct?
Well, I think there is still some, if you had removed October, then you still might have some reduction from these numbers.
But your basis for removing October isn't because of capacity, correct? It's because of your interpretation of the potential impact of condition 9.2.7 in the ITP, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So I'd like to ask briefly about your understanding of the specific water surface elevation issue that was evaluated in SDWA 84 as a potential limitation on the release of 1,000 CFS to the Colusa Basin drain. Are you familiar with what that report identified?
My understanding of the report was that during August and September mainly, but that agricultural runoff in the Colusa Basin drain limited the capacity, and there are, as with any channel, if the water surface elevation gets to a certain height, you have issues. And so that's where the water surface elevation was the how do I want to say, the critical water surface elevation was identified, and then the modeling was performed to determine how often that water surface elevation was exceeded.
Is it your understanding that the critical water surface elevation related to the water surface elevation relative to a berm or a bank elevation at a specific river mile on the drain?
I'm not sure of a specific river mile.
Can we return to SDWA 84, please, on page 2? And can we blow this up a little bit, please? and scroll down. So Mr. Wilson, I just want to try to maybe refresh your memory here. Can we scroll back up, please? There, great. That's good. So the paragraph that begins the model results, if you could read to yourself maybe the last two sentences in that paragraph, it might help refresh your memory.
Yes, it appears that at River Mile 9, there's the lowest elevation of the toe of the west berm and was determined to be the lowest field elevation at 25.3 feet.
Okay, so your understanding is it's that condition at roughly River Mile 9 that was determined to be the critical water surface elevation
Yes.
location, correct? Okay. So based on your expertise as a civil engineer, did you consider whether a construction-based solution at this location might increase capacity in the drain and affect the analysis of the number of days that water could be released at 1,000 CFS without causing problems?
Well, it seems that a construction-based solution would also affect the cost. And so you're still modifying or impacting the benefits analysis. So, but no, I did not consider construction-based solution.
Okay. Would it surprise you if I told you that the authority was evaluating berm improvements at this location?
Objection. Calls for speculation, assumes facts, not evidence.
Overruled.
No.
All right, we can take down SDWA 84, please. Thanks. Mr. Wilson, I'm going to move on to page 13 of your testimony, paragraph 25.
Okay.
So in paragraph 25, you suggest that, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but you suggest that sites could release no more than 306,000 acre feet for downstream and south of Delta participants because the release rate is limited to 1,000 CFS and the period is limited to July through November. Is that correct?
Yes, and that's merely a simple calculation of what is the maximum amount of water that can be released at 1,000 CFS over, or what is the amount of water that is released at 1,000 CFS over 153 days.
Okay. Are you aware that Sites is proposing operational exchanges with Shasta and Oroville?
Yes.
And do you have an understanding of the proposed exchanges with Shasta?
Yes.
Is it your understanding that for Shasta exchanges, Sites would release water from Sites Reservoir in the spring in order for water to be preserved in Shasta for later release?
Correct.
And is your understanding that releases from Sites would occur, or at least are projected to occur in kind of the April through June time period for those
Yes.
exchanges? Oh, sorry. I'm sorry, I didn't hear your answer. I was talking over you.
Yes.
Okay. So with a assuming maximum releases at 1,000 CFS for the period July through November, if we add releases to for Shasta Exchange during the time period of April through June, we would come up with a number greater than 306,000 for total annual releases from sites, correct?
Yes, it would be in on the ballpark of 450,000 acre feet.
Okay. So in paragraph 26, Mr. Wilson, you offer suggestions about potential limitations on the rediversion of water at the export facilities, correct?
Yes,
And you suggest that an annual volumetric cap of 245,000 acre feet, correct?
yes,
And you suggest a rate limit of 800 CFS, correct?
yes.
Are you aware that the California Department of Water Resources and Bureau of Reclamation have existing regulatory approval to move transfer water through the export facilities?
I'm aware that the Bureau of Reclamation and DWR have received biological opinions, and as part of those biological opinions, they are approved, they are allowed or not allowed, but those biological opinions cover the transfer of, or transfer of water up to a certain amount.
Okay. Is it your understanding that the sites project for its rediversions of sites water plans to rely on those approvals that the Bureau and DWR have to move transfer water?
Yes.
You mentioned the biological opinions for the projects providing for movement of a certain amount of transfer water, correct?
Yes.
And do you have an understanding of what those volumetric limits are for the movement of transfer water through the export facilities in those permits?
When the opinion.
The opinions, excuse me.
Yes. Yes. My understanding is that currently they're authorized to move up to 600,000 acre feet a year. But it's based on the water year type. And I know that's for critical and dry. I believe there's a different cap for wetter year types, but I'm not sure. But I'm sure for critical and dry, the cap is 600,000 acre feet.
And are you aware that the operations modeling for sites considers the available capacity at the bank's pumping plant in evaluating rediversion of sites water?
Yes.
And are you aware that that modeling considers the limitations at the bank's pumping plant in particular that are in existence due to the Army Corps permit?
Yes.
Okay. Given the existing volumetric limitations we just discussed on the movement of transfer water through the export facilities and the site's modeling that essentially kind of fits within these constraints, there isn't a need for the permit terms that you suggest in this paragraph 26, is there?
I believe there is a need, and the reason is that the biological opinions could be subject to change.
Okay. My understanding of your paragraph 26 is that you also suggest that a reason for at least the volumetric cap on rediversion is the potential for sites water to move through the export facilities outside of the transfer window of July through November. Is that correct?
Yes, when I first read the ITP summary and saw the size of the number, I was a little bit confused, and I was trying to figure out how they could move that much water. And so that's what led me to conclude that if there's some confusion, that then there should be specific permit terms to clarify that, to make sure that there's no confusion.
I believe you previously stated that you understood that sites will move water or redivert water at the export facilities consistent with the limitations that are on the project with respect to the time that transfer water may be moved through the facilities, correct?
Yes,
And that timing is limited to July through November, correct?
currently it is limited.
Okay. Now, so based on that existing limitation, there's not a need to put a specific time limitation with respect to those rediversions into the site's permit, correct?
No, it's my opinion that because of the possibility for future change, that these specific limitations should be put in the permit.
Do you have any evidence that you could point to that would say that there's a likelihood or a possibility that that time period for movement of transfer water through the export facilities is likely to change?
I feel that that almost the opposite of the way you said it, that because there is a possibility of the change, that is why you would include the permit terms, so that I wouldn't provide evidence that there's going to be a change. There's a possibility of a change, so you put the requirement in the permit so that it doesn't change.
Well, are you aware of any evidence that indicates a need to change that time period in terms of when movement of transfer of water is allowed through the export facilities?
No, I'm not aware of any currently, but again, we're in, you know, a time of change, so.
Are you aware of any evidence that would indicate a need to modify the volumetric limits that you mentioned that apply to the movement of transfer water through the export facilities?
Can you restate that?
Yeah, are you aware of any evidence that would indicate a need to modify the existing volumetric limits for movement of transfer water through the export facilities?
And just to clarify, by existing volumetric limits, you mean the 600,000?
Yes, yes.
I'm not aware of it.
Okay. I'm going to move on to paragraph 27, Mr. Wilson. In paragraph 27, you claim that the description of the location of the water sources for sites diversions in Ms. Bozzoni's testimony and the AIR EIS is insufficient to support the position that only Shasta and Tehama counties should be considered when determining the counties of origin,
Yes,
correct? And for context here, just so make sure we're on the same page, I understand your statement concerns the authority's request for partial assignment of state filing 25517 and release from priority of numerous state filings. Is that correct?
yes,
And I'm assuming your analysis is relying on Water Code Section 10505. Is that correct?
yeah,
And Water Code Section 10505 requires, for approval of a petition for assignment or release from priority, requires a showing that the approval or release will not deprive a county in which water originates of water necessary for the county's development, correct?
yes.
And to support your claim that the authority's analysis is insufficient, you compared flows available in the Sacramento River near the Red Bluff and Hamilton City points of diversion and releases from Keswick, correct?
Yes.
If we can turn to page 16 of your testimony in table 1, could we bring that up, please? This is SDWA 81. Page 6. Oh, great. So your comparative analysis between Keswick and Sacramento River flows near the points of diversion is contained here in table 1, correct?
Yes.
Do you agree that the differences between the average flow at Vina and the average flow at Keswick are greater than 4,200 CFS for each of the periods you provide?
Oh, 4,200, I'm sorry.
Yes.
I'm sorry, Mr. Wilson, was that a yes?
Yes.
So even if sites were diverting at the maximum requested rated diversion of 4,200 CFS, during the time periods you have listed in Table 1, the source of water for those diversions can reasonably be attributed to the Sacramento River tributaries downstream of Keswick, correct?
No, I disagree. See, at that point, you're trying to uh have flows of one flow of water flow on top of the other, so to speak. So let me restate. You're assuming that the Keswick flow is, quote, on the bottom, and the flow that originates from tributaries downstream of Keswick is on top, and that's the flow you're diverting. My analysis would be that you're diverting all of the flow in the river, and we're really, to look at the source, we're really looking at where did all of the flow come from. And so if, as I said, in most of the wet periods, half the flow comes from above Keswick, then I wasn't differentiating which part of it went to the Red Bluff diversion, or the Red Bluff diversion, and which part traveled downstream. I was merely making the point that at those diversion points, the water is about half upstream and half downstream.
But in my hypothetical, you could remove the Keswick flows in each of those year types, and there would still be adequate water to divert at 4,200 CFS, correct?
That's correct, but that doesn't mean that that's where that water came from.
Are you aware of any rules that the state board relies on to evaluate diversions of water from a stream in the manner you've suggested when you have multiple sources coming to a point of diversion?
I'm not aware of any specific instance where this has been determined. However, based on my experience working at the board, and just what the first thought that I had in terms of analyzing this, I would look at where is the source of the water, what percent. I don't see how you could hypothetically divert this much water off the top. So now that means the water that was released way upstream doesn't matter. It needs to all be combined at once and looked at, where did the water come from?
Did you undertake any analysis to determine whether the water released from Keswick would be legally available for sites to divert at the point of diversion?
No.
Okay. So you don't know whether that water released from Keswick may have been destined essentially for a downstream water user, perhaps as a release from Shasta.
No, however, I think you can make some assumption that in 2019 there was flood releases. In 1998, during that period, there was some flood releases. But no, I did not. I didn't try to track to account for who the water belonged to. I was more accounting for where it originated from.
I'm going to move on to pages, or excuse me, paragraphs 31 through 35, Mr. Wilson. And here, my understanding is you undertake an analysis of supply and demand in the counties you assert must be part of the watershed of origin analysis under Water Code Section 11460. Is that correct?
I attempted to estimate the future demand and what could possibly be required for future development in the counties I identified.
Okay. And yet, in your analysis, you calculate future demands between 3 and 18 million acre feet a year. Is that correct?
Yes, and I would say let me restate, I estimated. So
Estimated.
let's emphasize it was an estimate, but it was an exercise to kind of try to get an order of magnitude evaluation of the future demands in these counties.
Your analysis does not evaluate the resources, and by that I mean supply resources, available to fill the demands you've identified, correct?
That's correct.
So without identifying the supply resources available to fill these demands, it's not possible to determine whether these areas of origin will be deprived of water that they might need for development, correct?
No, because the whether or not there is a supply doesn't affect what the future demand would be. And so what I looked at that future demand in terms of, a very large estimate number, as you go on to the conclusion of my testimony in this section, I merely concluded that some of the water that Sites Authority is requesting to release from priority should be maintained as priority. So I wasn't necessarily identifying, well, there's 3 to 18 million acre feet demand, but there's 5 million acre feet that can come from here and 2 million acre feet that can come from here. I mainly pointed out the significant demand that is out there and argued that some of that demand should be met with these state filed applications that Sites is requesting to release from priority.
My understanding of your analysis of future demand was that it was being done in the context of the framework of Water Code Section 10,505 and 11,460, correct?
Yes.
And don't those code sections consider whether water would be diverted by a potential project such that there would not be water available in the future for the development within those counties or watersheds?
Correct.
And so in order to determine whether water was available for those future demands after considering diversions by the proposed project that's part of the petition, you need to understand whether there will be adequate water available to meet those future demands, correct?
Yes, however, the numbers that I came up with are significant and were orders significantly higher than the numbers used by the Sites Authority, but also address the issue of the Sites Authority having priority to divert and export water over the needs of the watershed and the area of origin.
Assuming enough water is available in the system to meet the site's demands and all of those future demands, there wouldn't be any deprivation of the water needs in the counties or watersheds of origin, correct?
Well, I think the assumption that there is not enough water to meet the demands in at least the Bay Delta watershed, has been very, pretty well stated that demand outweighs supply. Now, when you get up to an 18 million acre feet possibility, which is obviously at the high end of my estimate, I think it's pretty evident that there isn't enough supply to meet demand, at least in the current water supply. The current water development that we have in the state.
But you've offered no quantitative evidence of supplies that would support that statement, correct?
No.
Moving on to paragraph 37. On page 19 at lines 4 through 8, Mr. Wilson, you state that Dr. Sadat's statement that SWP and CVP project operators have been able to meet their regulatory obligations to prevent most exceedances is inaccurate with regard to electrical conductivity at the Old River Tracy OLD compliance monitoring station, correct?
Yes.
And to support this statement, my understanding is you evaluated exceedances of the EC objective at the Old River Tracy compliance point for the period 2008 to 2023. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Can we bring up SDWA 82, please? Mr. Wilson, is this which is labeled this exhibit, which is labeled SDW 82, your analysis of EC exceedances at the South Delta compliance points for the period 2008 to 2023?
Yes.
Okay. Can we scroll down on this tab, which is SDWA 82 notes, to line 23? I'm sorry, line 20. So on line 20, Mr. Wilson, well, let me just confirm, these notes on the tab labeled SDWA 82 notes are your notes, is that correct? That's kind of explain certain assumptions that are built into the exceedance analyses in the other tabs of this exhibit, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So on line 20, you state that for the period April 1 to 29, a 1.0 millimole per centimeter objective is applied. If the 30-day running average exceeds the objective, the entire 30-day averaging period is assumed to be out of compliance, correct?
Yes.
Why did you apply the 1 millimole per centimeter objective for the period April 1 through 29?
In applying this objective, the State Water Board determined that because it's a 30-day running average, the projects had most of April to get the 30-day running average down to the 0.7. So for the first 29 days, the 1.0 objective is applied because it's carried over from the period outside of April through September or April through August when the 0.7 is required.
Are you relying on any other source other than D1641 and specifically Table 2 for that explanation of how the State Board evaluates exceedances in the month of April?
No.
Okay. So can we, the objective for the period again excuse me. The objective for the period April through August is 0.7 millimoles a centimeter, correct?
Yeah.
And do you recall during the case in chief testimony that you testified that to evaluate compliance with the 0.7 millimoles a centimeter objective for April through August, footnote 2 in table 2 of D1641 instructs us to start on April 30th?
Correct.
So have you changed your opinion since your case in chief testimony on how to evaluate exceedances of the 0.7 millimoles a centimeter objective for the April through August period?
No. In the case in chief, I submitted the data and did not have the strict interpretation of the footnote 2. The table that I submitted for this is with the strict interpretation of footnote 2.
Okay, can we please bring up AHO 277 and page 194? We're looking for AHO 277, Ms. Mullins. If we can go to PDF page 194. And can we scroll down, please? A little further, please. Thank you. Mr. Wilson, in the middle of page PDF, PDF page 194, it lists the Southern Delta compliance points for evaluating compliance with the water quality objectives for agriculture, correct?
Yes.
And the objective is listed there in the right-hand column of April through August, 7/10 millimoses centimeter, correct, for the South Delta compliance points?
Yes.
And is your understanding that the objective is evaluated on a 30-day running average of EC?
Yes.
And is it your understanding that footnote 2 of this table explains the methodology for conducting that 30-day averaging analysis?
Yes.
Okay. Can we scroll down to footnote 2, please? And can we blow it up a bit, please? So, Mr. Wilson, you just confirmed that you'd previously testified that to evaluate compliance with the 7/10 millimose centimeter objective for April through August, footnote 2 instructs us to start on April 30th. Is that correct?
Well, by start, you mean that April 30th is the first day that you can evaluate the compliance because you need the 30 previous days to calculate the running average. And so on April 30th, you could evaluate compliance with that. And if on April 30th, the EC were to exceed 7/10, then the entire prior 30 days would be considered out of compliance.
Okay. And so by that explanation, I understand you, well, I understand you to be saying that the evaluation of potential exceedances for the April through August period starts on April 1st, correct?
Yes, but it can't be calculated until April 30th.
Correct. Can we go to SDWA 82 again, please?
That's 81.
And can we go to the Old River at Tracy tab? And can we scroll to the left, please? So we can see further. We can see the column that contains values for 2010. So, Mr. Wilson, I'd like to look at your analysis for 2010 for Old River at Tracy, which I believe appears in columns J, K, and L. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And can we scroll down, please, so we can see the values for April? So your analysis for April, Mr. Wilson, did not apply the rules that we just discussed, correct? In terms of starting on April 30th and evaluating the prior 30 days, correct?
No, on this table, the value on 3/31/2010 of the running average is 1,051. So that rounds to a 1.1 and is therefore out of compliance with the 1.0 standard. Thus, the 30 days above it, previous, are also out of compliance.
Well, I'm focused on April. So
Okay. But in April 1st, 2010, it's 1058. So that's above the 1.0 and therefore out of compliance.
but you just told me to analyze the objective that applies in the April through August period. We start by applying the 30-day average on April 30th, correct?
Yes.
And you have not done that here, correct? With respect to the values starting on April 1st and thereafter. Is that correct?
Correct.
So why haven't you done that here?
Well, I evaluated the exceedances in March. And then in April 1st, I didn't give them a pass in terms of not violating the 1.0.
But 1.0 doesn't apply in the month of April, correct?
Well, the 0.7 does. But if they are violating above the 1.0, then and that period exceeds is the period above, then they're still exceeding the 1.0.
But doesn't table 2 in the footnote we just reviewed instruct that you start essentially a new analysis come April 1st in order to be able to apply the 7/10 millimos objective for the period April through August?
Well, again, I think that if they exceed over the 1.0, at this point they're not, the April objective to just because they are allowed to reduce or required to meet a lower objective in April doesn't mean they don't have to still meet the 1.0 that is year round.
1.0 is not year round, correct? It's September through March.
Yes.
Okay. So when we were looking at table 2, I had understood your testimony to be you start the April through August analysis by first conducting a 30-day average analysis starting on April 30th. Is that correct?
Yes,
And you haven't conducted your analysis here for 2010 consistent with that approach, correct?
correct.
Can we scroll down a little bit further on this page, please? Mr. Wilson, what is the 30-day average for EC on April 30, 2010?
560.
And so that's less than the objective for April, correct?
Yes,
And are there any days between April 30th, 2010 and May 29th, 2010 inclusive, when the 30-day average exceeds the 0.7 millimos objective?
I don't see that on the chart. If they could scroll down. Correct.
So in light of those responses, there was no day in April 2010 where there was an exceedance of the 0.7 millimos EC water quality objective for the South Delta compliance point at Old River Tracy, correct?
Correct.
Mr. Bibbins, I probably have 5 to 10 more minutes, and I think I'll be finished. So to the extent you're thinking about a break soon.
Let's power through that and then we'll see where we need to go.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Wilson, I just want to look at paragraph 38 and paragraph 39 in your testimony. And in paragraph 38, you include a plot of a DSM-2 model run at EC, which is for the site's alternative 3B at channel 71, Old River near Tracy, correct?
Yes.
And in paragraph 39, at the beginning of the paragraph, you state that the chart shows an increase in EC at OLD of about 50 microsiemens a centimeter, which corresponds to the 220 through 321 2001 project sites diversions, correct?
Yes, projected.
Projected, okay. And your determinations that sites projected diversions from 220 to 321 2001 is based on your review of the site's diversion routing analysis tool, is that correct?
Yes.
And are you aware that DSM-2 data that you presented in your testimony uses sites Alt3B calcium data as input conditions?
Yes.
And are you aware that the diversions simulated in Alt3B include different diversion criteria than those included in the diversion routing analysis tool?
Yes.
Did you evaluate whether during the time period of 220 through 321, 2001, South Delta water quality objectives were exceeded in either the no action or the with project alternative?
Whether the model objective is, no,
Well, I'm asking, yes, did you evaluate whether either in the no action alternative or, yes, the modeled project alternative, there were exceedances of the water quality objectives in the Delta?
no,
Okay. Did you evaluate the actual historic um, water quality measurements for Old River at Tracy during this time period?
no,
So you don't know whether the objectives were being exceeded at the time period of 220 through 321, 2001.
correct. And also, I believe during that time period, I don't think the objectives were enforced. I don't think they started that until 2006. Two 2005.
I just want to make sure I understand the scope of your testimony in this section. You haven't provided any evidence here indicating that sites diversions would have led to an exceedance of the South Delta water quality objective at Old River at Tracy, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And then finally on page 21 at lines 1 through 3, you state that while these increases may not seem significant when averaged with other similar water year types, the modeled increases are significant when looked at in terms of actual irrigation cycles, correct?
Yes,
And when you say these increases, you're referring to some of the increases in the plot in paragraph 38, correct?
yes.
And what do you mean by actual irrigation cycles?
What I mean is that while the objective is presented in a 30-day running average form, actual irrigation is performed maybe over several days, up to 5 days. And so the crops are not seeing the 30 days prior average. The crops are seeing what happens those 5 days. And so that's what I was trying to get at, is that, you know, the irrigation water isn't pumped into a big tank and averaged all together for 30 days and then applied. It's applied at the rate and water quality that is there at the time that it's being irrigated.
So in preparation of your testimony, did you conduct any sort of analysis of what you're calling the actual irrigation cycles for the period 220 through 321, 2001 within the area around Old River at Tracy?
No.
Okay. Did you evaluate whether the changes in EC that are shown in the figure in paragraph 38 would have affected potential yield of crops grown in the area based on EC crop tolerances?
No.
I have no further questions. Thank you, Mr. Wilson.
Thank you.
All right, before we take a short break, I actually have a couple of questions for you, Mr. Wilson. I'm going to exercise my prerogative to ask them now so I don't forget. And then we'll take a 5-minute break and then we'll resume with Ms. Chester. But I want to go back to your paragraph 34, Mr. Wilson. And so it looks like you estimated hypothetical future demands for the 11 counties you identified in paragraph 33. And you did that, you summed the area and acreages of all of those counties, and you came up with 18 million. And then it looks like you made an assumption that between 10 and 25% of that total acreage may be developed in the future. Is that a fair summary of your testimony?
Yes,
Okay, and is that acreage that may be developed in the future, that's in addition to the acreage that's already been developed in those 11 counties, right?
correct.
And so what was the basis for your assumption that between 10 and 25% of the total acreage could be developed in the future?
I looked at Google Earth and maps to get a general estimate of what appeared to be developed and what appeared to be undeveloped, and excluding areas that appeared to be very mountainous, or that wouldn't be developable because of terrain.
Okay, all right, that's all I had. Let's take a 5-minute break. We'll come back at 3:22 and we'll resume with Ms. Chester. Thank you.
Thank you.
right.
This is
Ms.
the Chloe Porter. I'm ready.
Very good. You anticipated my question. All right. Ms. Chester, the floor is yours for cross-examination of Mr. Burke.
Thank you, Hearing Officer Bivens. Before I get started, I do want to note the site authority's objection to the commentary that Mr. Burke provided on slide 8 of his summary presentation, which included statements of observations made by, I believe, a water master. It's not within the scope of his rebuttal testimony, and we would also object on the grounds of hearsay. We can follow with written objections as appropriate.
That would be good. Please do, Ms. Chester.
Thank you. Mr. Burke, good to see you again.
Good afternoon.
I'm Michelle Chester on behalf of the Sites Authority. Ms. Mullen, can we please bring up Mr. Burke's testimony, SDWA 91? Thank you. And can we please go to PDF page 3 at the bottom of the page? Thank you. Mr. Burke, since the preparation of your case in chief testimony, you reviewed the ITP, Site's testimony concerning the ITP, and Site's case in chief testimony. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And can we scroll down to the top of PDF page 4, please? Mr. Burke, is the list in paragraph 5 a complete list of the documents you reviewed in preparation of your rebuttal testimony?
Let me take a quick look through that. There may have been other documents that I reviewed, but these are the primary documents that I based my opinion upon.
Thank you. Can we please scroll down to paragraph 8 on this page? In paragraph 8, Mr. Burke, you describe salinity impacts resulting from existing South Delta exports, correct?
That's correct.
And you conclude that the sites project will further impact water quality in the South Delta because it will increase South Delta exports, correct?
That's correct.
And did you perform any quantitative analysis regarding the alleged impacts of the sites project on salinity for purposes of your rebuttal testimony?
Yes, I did.
Did your quantitative analysis determine the magnitude of the alleged increase in salinity resulting from the sites project?
Based on my analysis, I plotted out specific periods of time where you could see the change in salinity based on the diversions or based on the increase in exports that are a function of the sites project. But I didn't do a quantitative analysis on the full time period. I should correct that a little bit. I ran the analysis for the full time period, but we didn't evaluate every single year in that period.
For clarity, I asked specifically about the magnitude of the alleged increase in salinity, and I believe your response was that you determined the change in salinity. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And the change in salinity is between the no action alternative and the selected alternative 3. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. Can we please scroll to paragraph 10 on page 5? At the beginning of paragraph 10, you reference the site's operations plan. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'd have to take a look. Yes, I do. I referenced Miss Pizzoni's comment on the site's operation plan.
And did you review the site's operation plan in preparation of your rebuttal testimony?
I looked at several different components of the operation plan, but I didn't look at every aspect of it.
Thank you. In this paragraph, you also referenced the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan, correct?
That's correct.
And did you review the Bay Delta Plan in preparation for your rebuttal testimony?
I reviewed that portion that identified beneficial uses of water in the Delta.
At about lines 22 to 23 in this paragraph, you say that episodic periods of salinity are important because the requirement to irrigate a crop is an immediate need, correct?
And that's correct.
And you show examples of these episodic periods in figures 1 and 2, is that correct?
That's correct.
Can we please scroll down to PDF page 6? These two figures show data from July 2001 and March 2000, correct?
That's correct.
And these are two examples of specific months that you selected out of an 82-year period of analysis, correct?
That's correct.
Did you review all months at all compliance locations in the 82-year period modeled by the sites team for the project's no action alternative and alternative 3?
I did a visual observation of the results of the analysis of the alt 3 minus the no action alternative, but I didn't look at the actual numbers for every single month through that period.
And as you say in line 21 of paragraph 10, could we scroll back up, please? Thank you. From what you reviewed, sometimes the change in salinity increased and sometimes the salinity decreased during the modeling period, correct?
That's right. There was periods of both.
And you selected 2 months at 2 different compliance locations that show relatively large increases in salinity in figures 1 and 2, correct?
I showed 2 months of periods where there was an increase in salinity. One was at a compliance location. Another one was just on a critical area of the Delta where irrigation withdrawals are being performed.
Would you say that the changes reflected in figures 1 and 2 are representative of all 82 years in the modeling period?
No, I selected these 2 periods because they highlight what could happen during certain years based on exports and water and the water year type.
In your review, did you observe years where the water quality improved as compared to the no action alternative?
I observed periods that had short durations that had an improvement in water quality. That's correct.
Do figures 1 and 2 provide any information regarding compliance with D1641 objectives at either location in any months presented?
I believe that figures 1 and 2 are useful in evaluating D1641 compliance because they show that this salinity can increase significantly during certain periods during exports that are generated by the project, making it harder to comply with D1641 criteria.
Figures 1 and 2 reflect a relative change in salinity, correct?
That's correct.
And they don't present overall salinity levels, do they?
No, they just show the impact of the site's operations on salinity levels at these 2 locations.
Without reviewing the overall salinity levels, it's not possible to determine compliance with D1641 or any applicable EC objectives. Is that correct?
No, you're correct in that regard, but these figures weren't computed or developed in order to make that assumption or make that review. They were developed and presented to show the impact that sites would have on EC levels in the channels.
And you don't include any data or anecdotal information about irrigators needing to water crops from surface water impacted by salinity during the two selected time periods at the two selected locations, do you?
I know we didn't look back to see what irrigators might have been irrigating at that time, but I think Dr. Leinfelder Miles will evaluate what these relative increases in salinity and the impact they will have on crops.
And so your specific conclusion that these 2 months during the 82-year period could have resulted in plant damage and decrease in production is not supported by any evidence in your rebuttal testimony, is it?
I'm not trying to make that assumption that these will damage crops because I'm not an expert in crop tolerance of salinity. I was just showing through these two figures that the impacts from the sites project can result in an increase in salinity in the rivers.
Mr. Burke, would you agree that the South Delta is influenced by tides?
I do.
Would you agree that salinity or EC can change by hundreds of microsiemens per centimeter each day in a tidally influenced river?
That's correct. I think you can see that from the figures 1 and 2 and the variation you see with each tidal cycle on the plot.
Did you perform any analysis to confirm whether changes to salinity caused by sites' operations would impact agricultural production any more than the daily fluctuations in EC that already occur?
No, we didn't look at the impact upon agricultural operations, just the change in the mean value of EC over these periods.
Can we please scroll down to paragraph 11? Thank you. Mr. Burke, you quote from Sites witness Chad Whittington's testimony regarding the relative increase in SWP and CVP delta exports of SWP and CVP project supply between the project's no action alternative and alternative 3. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And as stated in this quote, Mr. Whittington concludes that the increase in SWP and CVP delta exports is about 200,000 acre feet per year, correct?
That's correct.
And in paragraph 12, you state that the increase ranges as high as 500,000 acre feet per year, correct?
That's correct.
Do you dispute Mr. Whittington's conclusion that the increase in SWP and CVP delta exports is about 200,000 acre feet per year?
I do because the sites team's DSM-2 models show a different number than what Mr. Whittington used.
Isn't it correct that your estimate includes considerations of the effects that exchange operations have on upstream water supply, not just the effects of site releases for south of Delta exports?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, please?
Isn't it correct that your estimate includes considerations of the effects that exchange operations have on upstream water supply, not just the effects of sites releases for south of Delta exports?
The analysis I've conducted are based on all of the site's operations as reflected in their discharges to the South Delta and exports from the South Delta. It's not just looking at exports, it's looking at the full operations of the project throughout these time periods. So that I imagine would consider other elements of the project.
And isn't it correct that Mr. Whittington's estimate only reflects SWP and CVP exports and did not intend to include exports of sites water?
It's possible that may be what he was considering, but if he did, then that's misleading because that's not really providing you with the numbers that are being exported and those impacts that those exports will have in the South Delta.
In paragraph 12, you state that the result of increase in exports periodically results in an increase in salinity, correct?
That's correct.
Did you confirm whether that increase in salinity resulted in an exceedance of D1641 objectives at any compliance location?
No, we didn't look at any exceedances, just the change from the exports and operations of the sites project itself.
Did you confirm whether the increase in salinity resulted in an exceedance of any relevant tolerances for potential effects on crop yield?
We didn't evaluate crop yield. That's not my expertise.
Can we please scroll down to paragraph 14? Mr. Burke, in this paragraph, you quote from Ms. Forsyth's case in chief testimony regarding considerations of the project's compliance with Water Code Section 10504, correct?
That's correct.
And can we please scroll to paragraph 15 on the next page? Mr. Burke, in paragraph 15, you conclude that the increase in salinity levels would seem to be in conflict with Ms. Forsyth's statement. Is that correct?
I'd have to go back and review her statement.
Sure.
Yeah, I would have to say that I disagree with her statement made in paragraph 14.
Okay, and going back to 15, your conclusion here is that the increase in salinity would seem to be in conflict with her statement. Is that right?
That's correct. And that primary refers to, in her statement, she says that the application is part of a coordinated plan and is otherwise not in conflict with such general or coordinated plan or with water quality objectives just established pursuant to law. Now, I tried to rebut that because what the operations of the plan is doing is resulting in increase in exports, which causes an increase in salinity within the channels, which makes it much harder to reach the water quality objectives that the projects are trying to meet in the South Delta. Now, it's already shown that the water quality objectives, especially at P12, Old River at Tracy, is not met very often. Therefore, if you increase the salinity in the channels, it's going to be met less often, which makes it much harder to, or which makes the project impact their ability to achieve water quality objectives as stated in the water quality control plan.
And Mr. Burke, as we've discussed, your analysis in this section does not include any confirmation of whether the increase in salinity resulted in exceedances of D1641 objectives at any compliance location, correct?
No, I was only looking at the direction of change in water quality characteristics of the channels, not necessarily whether or not it put the project over an exceedance value.
So your conclusion that the project seems to be in conflict with Water Code Section 10504 is based only on increases in salinity between the no action alternative and alternative 3 modeling scenarios, correct?
Well, there's actually two components to that observation. One is that the salinity objective at Old River at Tracy is being exceeded quite frequently. Two, if you increase the salinity in the channels, you're going to exceed that objective even more frequently. Therefore, it's not in coordination with the water quality control plan because it's making it much harder to meet water quality objectives.
Back to my question, Mr. Burke, your conclusion that the project seems to be in conflict with Water Code Section 10504 is based on a relative increase between the two scenarios, modeling scenarios, correct?
Based on a relative increase between the two modeling scenarios and an existing condition that's already in conflict with the water quality objectives.
So your conclusion only takes into account any applicable water quality objectives to the extent that it's your understanding the objectives are currently not met, correct?
My understanding and evaluation of data.
And is that data presented in your rebuttal testimony?
No, we haven't. We've plotted it up. Actually, no, it's not presented in the rebuttal testimony.
Did you review any general or coordinated plan in reaching your conclusion in paragraph 15?
When you say general or coordinated plan, which plans are you referring to?
I'm asking you that question.
I reviewed the water quality control plan and I reviewed D1641 water quality objectives.
And so from your review, you identified provisions that cites as in conflict in those specific and general plans? Excuse me, those coordinated or general plans?
In my opinion, is since those D1641 is being exceeded now on a frequent basis, and the site's project will increase the salinity levels in the channel, it's going to make it much harder to, or increase the amount of exceedances that we see for the D1641 objectives in the South Delta.
So your conclusion is based on existing exceedances and doesn't take into account whether the project is in conflict with any general or coordinated plan, correct?
Based on existing exceedances and the result of the project, or the impact that the project has on salinity in the delta channels.
And again, the impact that the project has on salinity in the delta channels is a relative increase between the two modeled scenarios, correct?
That's correct.
Before we move on, can we please scroll back to page 4 at line 20? Mr. Burke, this section is entitled Project Operations Will Result in Downstream Senior Water Right Holders Receiving Degraded Water Quality, correct?
That's correct.
You don't present any evidence of or reference any senior water right holders in section A of your testimony, do you?
I don't call out this existing senior water rights holders. I only identify the water quality parameters that will be changing based on the site's operations.
Can we please go back to page 8 at paragraph 16? Mr. Burke, in paragraph 16, you state that project operations result in an increase in South Delta exports, which has a corresponding increase in the salinity level at the Old River Tracy compliance point, correct?
That's correct.
And you reference figure 3 to support your conclusion here, correct?
That's correct.
Can we please scroll down to figure 3? How does this figure inform your understanding of water quality conditions under sites operations?
This figure was developed looking at condition of the existing project exports running the DSM-2 model with no project exports. What we wanted to see was the overall impact that exports was having on a general nature within the South Delta area. What we wanted to see is there really an impact that's happening due to these exports? And so we ran this model through the 2014 through looks like 2017 period to determine whether or not there was an increase in salinity level during the periods when there was exports. And this is what we found from that analysis.
And you referred to existing export conditions and no export conditions, which is reflected in the title of figure 3, correct?
That's correct.
Is it fair to say that figure 3 shows the difference in historical conditions with exports compared to hypothetical historical conditions with no exports?
Well, whenever you remove a component from a model, it's going to make it theoretical. But we took the two models, and the only thing difference between these two models was exports. Every other component, inflow, outflow, and tidal action is exactly the same. The only change we made to this was the exports, which would make it theoretical in that regards, but it's also a common technique in order to understand the impact of any one component in a modeling scenario.
And figure 3 only shows a relative change in salinity, correct?
That's correct.
There's no information about total salinity during the time frame illustrated, is there?
No, there isn't.
There's no information regarding the amount of South Delta exports during the time frame illustrated, is there?
No, we don't have a component showing this change in exports.
The figure doesn't
No.
illustrate how the magnitude of exports would change with sites operation, does it?
No, we didn't put together a relationship trying to regress exports versus change in salinity.
There's no information about the cause of the changes in salinity, is there?
I believe there is. Looking at the model, we have two identical models. The only one thing that was changed in these two models is that the exports were removed from one of the models. And I think that shows that the exports were having that impact upon the salinity level.
Aren't there conditions other than the amount of South Delta exports that can influence salinity at the Old River at Tracy Road compliance point?
There are, and those components are identical in both models.
There's no information in this figure about compliance with any applicable salinity objectives, is there?
No, there isn't.
Can we please scroll down to paragraph 18? Mr. Burke, you state that because existing flows are often not available to meet all D1641 regulations, the project will have a deleterious effect on water availability and water quality, correct?
That's correct.
Based on your review, can South Delta exports improve water quality?
In my review of the effect of exports on water quality, there were short duration periods where there is an improvement in water quality, but overall the impact was a negative effect on water quality within the South Delta.
So as a yes or no question, your answer is yes, the South Delta exports can improve water quality?
To a small extent, yes, but not nearly as much as it can aggravate the existing water quality.
Isn't it true that South Delta exports can draw Sacramento River water into the South Delta that results in a relative decrease in salinity?
Not typically, no. Because the water, most of the water is being drawn down towards the Clifton Court Forward Way or Jones Pumping Plant is being drawn down in that direction for export. And so due to tidal flushing, some of that does make it back into Grant Line Canal and Old River, but not to a significant extent.
And what do you mean by significant extent?
Not that it has a major impact on salinity levels that we've been able to see in any of our modeling work.
And how would you define a major impact on salinity?
I would say a dramatic lowering of salinity if we were pulling in, if that fresh water that we're getting out of the Sacramento River were to infiltrate into Grant Line Canal or Old River, we would see that with a reduction in salinity levels in those areas with the increase in pumping. But we're actually seeing the opposite. We're seeing with the increase in pumping, we're seeing a worsening of water quality conditions, which tells me that you're not pulling in the fresh water from the Sacramento River into the South Delta. You're actually just exporting most of it.
Can we please scroll down to paragraph 20? You state that no requirement has been proposed by the site's authority to have water stored for the CVP and SWP to be used to assist in meeting their existing CVP and SWP regulatory obligations, correct?
I haven't seen anything stating that the how to use that as improving their water quality. No.
Mr. Burke, I believe we discussed this in cross-examination on your case in chief testimony, but are you aware that DWR is not currently a storage partner of the site's project?
I am.
Based on that fact, isn't it correct that sites could not have a requirement directing the use of SWP water?
I'm not sure whether or not they can or cannot have it, but I know that they're not imposing any kind of requirement upon it, even though that exports that they're now facilitating is resulting in an adverse effect on water quality in the South Delta.
So it's your recommendation that sites tell Reclamation how to use its capacity interest in the site's reservoir?
No, I wouldn't want them to necessarily tell Reclamation or DWR how to use the water that they have, but I think with the knowledge that they're facilitating exports that are worsening water quality in the South Delta, I think there should be at least an effort of some sort to determine if there's ways to mitigate those impacts.
You reviewed Ms. Bizzoni and Ms. Forsythe's rebuttal testimony, correct?
That's correct.
Do you recall discussion in their testimony regarding exchanges between Reclamation and non-federal sites participants?
I don't recall the specifics of that, but I know that that's a factor within the operations.
We can pull it up if necessary, but do you recall, for example, Ms. Forsythe's testimony regarding the use of non-reclamation water storage at sites to assist Reclamation in meeting its CVP purposes?
I don't recall that specifically, but I agree that she probably said that. That sounds reasonable.
Then wouldn't you agree that the site's project provides Reclamation with an opportunity to use exchanges to meet its CVP obligations?
When you say obligations, what kind of obligations are you referring to?
It could be salinity obligations. Your testimony specifically says regulatory obligations.
Yeah, I've seen nothing that there are statements made in the testimony of some of the site's team members stating that the water stored in sites reservoir provides opportunities for the CVP and SWP to help meet water quality obligations. But yet I haven't seen anything in the operations plan or in the description of the project that tells them how they should use that or develops any kind of a plan to show what could be done with that water to help mitigate some of the impacts from the project.
So it's your understanding that it's feasible that reclamation could, has an opportunity to use exchanges to meet the CVP regulatory obligations, but you haven't seen it?
I'm not even sure if it is feasible. I think there's a potential that exists there, but I haven't seen any studies or analysis to determine if there's ways that they could try to do that.
And did you undertake any of those studies or analysis?
No, we didn't feel like it was really in our purview to do that for sites. It's something that we thought sites should actually try to come up with themselves to mitigate their impacts.
Okay, let's move to paragraph 22. Thank you. In this paragraph, you reference in-channel water requirements, correct?
I'll have to read that paragraph for a second. Okay, I see where that statement's made.
State that those requirements are not presently being met or may be harder to meet under the site's operation plan, correct?
That's correct.
What in-stream requirements are you referring to?
In-stream requirements necessary to bring down the salinity levels within the South Delta channels.
Are you
Or
just
meet the water depth requirements necessary to allow the irrigators to continue diverting water.
Can you repeat that last part of your statement? The
Okay.
irrigator requirements?
To in-stream flow requirements necessary to provide enough water depth within the channels to allow the in-stream diverters to continue diverting water out of the channels in the South Delta.
Thank you. Can we please move to PDF page 13? Mr. Burke, is figure 4 the same as figure 15 from your case in chief testimony?
It's possible. I've got it here. I can take a quick look and see.
And for reference, you were looking at SDWA 2A.
That's correct. It is figure 15 in SDWA 2A.
Mr. Burke, as you said in your case in chief testimony, this figure shows the relationship between the flow level in the slough as a function of the amount of exports, correct?
It's the relationship between the flow level in Sugar Cut and the amount of flow that can enter Tom Plain Slough.
Thank you. And as you say in paragraph 24, 0 on the y-axis represents no delta exports, correct?
That's correct.
You also say in paragraph 24 that 100 represents the current level of South Delta exports that exist today, correct?
That's correct.
And you used DSM-2 modeling data for this figure, correct?
We use DSM-2 to come up with the water level on the downstream side of the structure. And then to determine how much water flows through the structure, we developed a structure rating curve based on the siphons and the 2 concrete culverts that pass through the structure.
How current is the present export level referenced here?
I would say that's probably through 2014 or 2015.
Do you do any analysis related to flow beyond the present export level?
not sure what you mean by flow beyond.
Your figure 4 cuts off at the present export level, labeled as 100%.
Oh, I see. Any impact or the change in inflow to Tom Paine Slough from flows that are beyond the present existing level? And
Correct.
we didn't look at that. We were just looking at the relationship between exports and flow into Tom Paine Slough.
So you did not consider the relative increase from the present export level to exports that account for sites operations, did you?
No, we were just trying to establish the relationship between exports, water surface elevation, and flow into Tom Paine Slough. Any change to those exports will reduce the water surface elevation and lower those flows into the slough.
Would you
First,
agree?
before we analyze what would an actual project would do, we wanted to make sure that we understood the dynamics of the process that's reducing the flow into Tom Paine Slough. And that's what this figure was intended to do.
Would you agree that the increase of exports caused by sites would be small relative to the change from 0 to present export level?
Yeah, the incremental increase from the sites project would be a small increase. But then the increase that we see in water quality and water availability is small for most of the projects that are approved throughout the Delta. It's just the incremental aggregation of all of those different projects is why we're here today looking at the reduction in flow coming into the Tom Paine Slough.
Mr. Burke, does your rebuttal testimony present any of that aggregate data of other projects in addition to the site's project operations?
No, we just analyzed the existing condition and the fact that the sites project will aggravate that condition by lowering water levels even more with an increase in exports.
Can we please go to page 14 at paragraph 29? You state at line 16 that the above quoted statements regarding the project are in conflict with the results of DSM-2 modeling, correct?
That's correct. And I'd like to be able to read some of those comments quickly before we get into details. Okay, I'm ready.
You previously confirmed it's your opinion that based on the modeling, sometimes the change in salinity increases and sometimes the change in salinity decreases during the modeling period, correct?
We saw periods of increase in salinity and decrease, that's correct. But
And
majority of the changes were of an increase in salinity.
And your analysis didn't include consideration of whether sites operations would cause violations of D1641 objectives, correct?
Could you repeat that, please?
Your analysis did not include consideration of whether sites operations would cause violations of D1641 objectives, correct?
No, I think that actually did. Because what we wanted to establish that there are water quality objectives that are not being met right presently in the South Delta. What we wanted to do was show whether or not the impacts from the sites project would aggravate those water quality conditions and further aggravate the ability to meet those water quality conditions. And in that regard, we feel that sites project is furthering or hindering the ability of the projects to meet those water quality conditions.
And again, your conclusions are based only on existing frequency of exceedances, correct?
The frequency of exceedances from around 2006 to 2024.
Can we please go down to page 15, paragraph 32? In lines 12 through 15, you reference Mr. Miko's testimony that confirms the DSM-2 model results are only useful in a comparative analysis, correct?
That's correct.
And the sites team uses the same version of DSM-2 that was used to model the no action alternative and alternative 3 scenarios, correct?
I'm sorry, would you repeat that again?
The sites team used the same version of DSM-2 to model the no action alternative and alternative 3 scenarios, correct?
That's correct.
So if there's any bias or error in the model, it would be reflected in both the no action alternative and alternative 3 scenarios, correct?
That's correct.
You included in SDWA 93 examples of DSM-2 modeling compared to observed EC, correct?
You mean 92?
I don't believe so.
Yeah, I think it is 92.
Can we please bring up SDWA 93?
Projections.
In this.
I see that, yeah.
Okay, may I interrupt for a minute? This is John Herrick. I think this is the exhibit that I started to cross someone on, and there are a lot of objections, and so we didn't do any further cross on it, and we weren't intending to submit it as evidence. If Ms. Chester wants to go through it, that's okay with me, but I don't think we'll be offering this. It was a bad decision on my part to use something that wasn't corroborated before crossing somebody. So with that said, it's up to you if you want to go forward.
So for clarification, are you withdrawing SDWA 93?
It's my understanding we're not going to be offering that, and that this is the exhibit that has multiple graphs like this, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Can we please go back to SDWA 91 at page 17? Thank you. Looking specifically at figure 5, if we can scroll down a little bit further. You conclude at the top of page 15 that based on figure 5, DSM-2 modeling is not reliable to evaluate the proposed project, correct?
That's correct.
And your example here in figure 5, and for reference, the others in SDWA 93, each show 1 month of observed versus modeled data at different locations, correct?
That's correct.
And this is 1 month out of the total 82-year period that the DSM-2 model was run, correct?
No, that's not how these are developed. These are developed by a DWR, and they come up with these plots when they're having a JPOD event that they want to evaluate the impacts for that JPOD event. So what they do is they run a scenario using DSM-2 that looks at the before and after transfers that they do with JPOD. And then they come back afterwards and compare that to what actually happened in the channel based on the actual salinity level. And so there's actually 3 lines on this plot, although you can only see 2.
Mr. Burke, I appreciate the clarification. I'm actually ready to move on. I understand from your direct
Okay, yeah.
testimony. Thank you. If we can go to paragraph 32. Thank you. You state here that the sites team used the DSM-2 model to compare incremental changes between the no action alternative and alternative 3, correct?
Let me 1 second so I can read through that paragraph. Okay, I understand.
So yes, you agree?
Oh, I guess repeat the question, please.
The sites team used the DSM-2 model to compare incremental changes between the no action alternative and alternative 3 scenarios, correct?
That's correct.
And the sites team did not use the DSM-2 model as a reflection of historical conditions, did they?
Actually, they did. The no action condition would be considered a historical baseline to compare the project operations to.
The sites team did not present the DSM-2 results as reflective of actual historical conditions, didn't they?
They didn't use it to reflect actual historic conditions, only to compare the operational changes from sites to the historic conditions as represented by the DSM-2 model.
Thank you. Can we please go to PDF page 19 at figure 6? Figure 6 is the same as figure 11 from your case in chief testimony, isn't it?
I believe so. I can double check. Let's see. That's correct. It is.
We don't need to go through it. But to confirm, your conclusions from what is now figure 6 have not changed since your case in chief testimony, have they?
And no, they haven't.
Okay. Can we scroll down to section D on this page, please? Looking at paragraph 38, you state that it's inappropriate to use monthly averages to assess water quality changes, correct?
That's correct.
Did you assess whether sites' use of monthly averages resulted in incorrect conclusions regarding exceedances of water quality objectives?
I did. And I agree that they were inappropriate to use those procedures.
I'm not sure that answers my questions. You're saying you assessed whether sites' use of monthly averages resulted in incorrect conclusions regarding exceedances of water quality objectives?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question again, please?
Did you assess whether sites' use of monthly averages resulted in incorrect conclusions regarding exceedances of water quality objectives?
That's correct. I did assess their use of that procedure in determining whether or not there are any water quality exceedances.
You're not recommending that sites use something other than the applicable water quality objectives to assess potential impacts, are you?
No, I'm not recommending that they use another water quality objective to evaluate impacts, just that their assessment or their manipulation of the output from the DSM-2 model will obfuscate any impacts that may come from the site's operations.
And when you say impacts, are you referring to exceedances of water quality objectives?
No, I'm referring to decreases in water level and increases in salinity. Whether those are enough to generate more exceedances than already exist, you'd have to go back and look at this minute details of each month. But we know that you will get larger increases in salinity. And those increases in salinity, when you average those out on a monthly basis, then average those months over 82 years, they're going to disappear.
So you can correct me if I'm misunderstanding, but did you assess whether sites' use of the monthly averages resulted in incorrect conclusions regarding exceedances of water quality objectives?
Yeah, I assessed that their use of monthly averages was incorrect. That was my assessment.
Yes, that it was incorrect. Did you assess whether it resulted in incorrect conclusions related to exceedances of water quality objectives? Were they wrong of when exceedances did or did not occur?
Yes, I agree. I believe that they are wrong in whether exceedances do and do not occur by doing their monthly exceedances.
And did you present any of those instances of incorrect conclusions in your rebuttal testimony?
And no, we didn't.
Okay. In paragraph 39, if we could please scroll down. You state that there are no comparisons showing results for the southern half of the delta, correct?
That's correct.
By southern half of the delta, you're referring to the compliance points such as Old River at Tracy Road Bridge, correct?
That's correct. Can
we please go to PDF page 21, the map, which I believe is figure 7? Thank you. And by southern half of the delta, you're also referring to Old River at Middle River, correct?
That's correct.
And also San Joaquin at Brant Bridge.
That's correct.
Can we please bring up AHO 136? Mr. Burke, are you familiar with the appendices to the final environmental impact report?
I don't believe I've looked through them in detail.
Do you recall this Appendix 6B5 water quality compliance?
Not off the top of my head, I don't.
Can we please scroll to PDF page 2? Mr. Burke, do you see here at the top of the page where it says that the following results are included for salinity results at key project locations for the following alternatives?
I see that.
And do you see in the chart that there is a list of locations and a list of corresponding figure numbers on this page?
I do.
Can we please scroll down to see a little bit more of this chart? Great, thank you. Mr. Burke, do you see that figure 3 is D1641 AG Old River at Tracy Road Bridge?
That's correct.
Do you see that figure 8 is D1641 AG San Joaquin River at Brant Bridge?
That's correct.
And do you see that figure 10 is D1641 AG Old River near Middle River?
That's correct.
Can we please scroll to PDF page 6? Mr. Burke, this is figure 3 showing the compliance exceedance plot for Old River at Tracy Road Bridge, correct?
That's what it says, yes.
Can we please go to PDF page 11? And this is figure 8 for Brant Bridge, correct?
That's correct.
Can we please go to PDF page 13? And this is figure 10 for Old River near Middle River, correct?
That's correct.
Mr. Burke, I believe in your direct testimony, you confirmed that you reviewed the input and output of the DSM-2 models for the final EIR, EIS, and ITP, correct?
That's correct.
Did you evaluate daily outputs using the DSM-2 files provided to you by the site's operations modeling team?
I believe the output files that we looked at were actually 15-minute models.
15-minute models.
Or 15-minute time steps in the models.
From your understanding of the DSM-2 model files, the exceedance charts we've looked at here in Appendix 6B5 rely on daily or 15-minute outputs, correct?
More than likely, yeah, I agree.
Okay, can we please go back to SDWA 91 at page 20? Thank you. And again, looking at paragraph 39, does that change your conclusion in this paragraph that none of the compliance points in the Southern Delta have ever been evaluated?
No, because this paragraph and the statement that I'm making there was based on my review and rebuttal of the sites team's case in chief, which they didn't include any of those plots. But in relationship to those exceedance plots, they themselves have issues in that they're not showing you a picture of what's actually happening with salinity. They take the data over the time period that you've made your analysis for, they shuffle the data up, then sort it from high to low, and then plot it up. It's not showing you periods when you may get high salinity and may get low salinity. It's assuming that all those salinities are at the same level at the same time, which is not the case. So you could be missing large areas or time periods when you have increases in salinity, and that won't show up in these exceedance plots because you're only looking at the number of exceedances you have over the period of your study, not necessarily when they occurred or where they occurred in time.
Mr. Burke, would sites diversions to storage, diversions to storage affect the San Joaquin River?
We didn't analyze that.
Isn't it logical that at the time of diversion, sites diversion to storage would have no or a nominal effect on water quality at the compliance locations in the southern half of the Delta?
Would you repeat that, please?
Isn't it logical that at the time of diversion, sites diversion to storage would have no or a nominal effect on water quality at the compliance locations in the southern half of the delta.
For sites diversion to storage from the Sacramento River, I would tend to agree with that. It's unlikely to have any impact that far south in the delta.
Isn't it correct that at the time of diversion, diversions to storage would most likely affect compliance locations in the northern half of the delta?
For diversions to storage from the Sacramento River, that's correct.
Okay. Can we please go to page 25 at lines 4 to 5? Mr. Burke, here at lines 4 to 5, you say that you're informed that complaints are sent to DWR regarding low water levels in the southern delta in most years, correct?
I understand that DWR has requested that people send them complaints about low water levels. And my understanding with talking to SDWA staff is that that can be done, but there's been very little response from DWR in response to those comments or questions.
So am I correct that when you say you are informed, you're referring to those conversations with SDWA staff, correct?
Yeah, just working with SDWA over the last 5 or 6 years, conversations I've had with them and looking at the water level control plan that DWR and the Bureau has put together.
When you say SDWA, who are you referring to?
Primarily, John Herrick has been my primary contact.
Do you have any personal experience submitting, receiving, or reviewing complaints to DWR each year?
No, I haven't.
And what do you mean in this sentence by most years?
Could you tell me where that is?
Yes, I'm looking at between lines 4 and 5. It says, I am informed that such complaints occur in most years.
Yeah, my understanding is that on most years, there are areas where there are low water levels preventing some of the irrigators from drawing water from the channels.
Yes, and what do you mean by most years? Can you define most years?
That's rather qualitative. I would say most of the years that I've been working with South Delta Water Agency, that I've heard about problems that they've had with farmers being able to irrigate from the channels.
Okay, that is all the questions I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Chester. Ms. Mandel Rice, do the state water contractors have cross-examination questions for Mr. Burke or Mr. Wilson?
I will have just a, my apologies. I will have just a few for Mr. Burke. Typically, we have DWR go first in this order, though, and I would suggest that we do that if Mr. Soderlund is available now.
I am happy to accommodate that if Mr. Soderlund is ready.
I am, thank you. Sorry, can you hear me? My microphone has not been working great, so I just want to make sure that I'm coming.
South Delta can hear you.
Great, thank you. All right, if we could get Mr. Burke's testimony back up. SDWA
91.
And I'm gonna apologize, Ms. Mullen. I have the page numbers as far as PDF, not the PDF numbers, but the actual numbers at the bottom of the page. So hopefully we can get this online and not be too problematic. But I'd like to go to page 5. And we'll see where that is, PDF, and we'll make adjustments.
This is John Herrick. I believe they're the same just because his testimony starts with page 1.
Well, that makes it easy. So that's great. So page 5, if you could scroll down, it might even be going to, actually, I think we'll go to the next page and we'll go to figure 2. Mr. Bird, do you see figure 2 where it purports to show an increase in salinity at Sugar Cut in the March of 2000, year 2000?
Say again. I do.
Is it your understanding that sites project water will be rediverted in the month of March?
I am not familiar with all the times that you get diversions, but what I did was rely upon the sites team's development of the DSM-2 models with the project and with the no action alternative and their assessment of when diversions and exports were occurring.
And do you know if this particular output at the time, if the other water quality objectives were being met, specifically outflow and Western Delta salinity?
No, I don't.
We could go to page 7, paragraph 12. In line 5 specifically, it says, you state that based on an evaluation of the DSM-2 model from the sites team. Do you see that?
I do.
And how did you conduct your evaluation of the model? That might be a little bit too general, but were you provided the model files from the sites team?
And that's correct. We were provided the full model package for each of the different alternatives that were being evaluated.
And did you find it important to have the underlying model files and inputs in order to evaluate the results of the model?
Oh, yes, it was very important. It really helps to be able to use sites' own models when we're doing this evaluation. We don't want to develop our own models and then get into a period of model wars or our models are right and your models are wrong. We always try to prefer to use the models developed by the project's team so that we're using the same exact information they are and not modifying anything.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to page 8, paragraph 16. In this paragraph, I think I'm gonna paraphrase, but you can correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that you state that an analysis of a modeling run shows that the South Delta exports can result in increased salinity in the South Delta. Is that correct?
That's generally correct, yes.
And I believe when you're answering Ms. Chester, you stated that the only change that you did to show with exports and without exports was to essentially cut off the exports. Is that correct?
Yeah, the way we looked at it without exports was to actually turn all the exports to 0. So there will be no exports from the model, leaving all of the other files, and there's hundreds of files in these modeling packages, leaving them identical and only changing that one factor.
So in cutting out the exports, you didn't also reduce the reservoir releases made to support the exports. Is that correct?
I know that wouldn't have been done, no.
So the result in this particular modeling run is you would have reservoir releases being made to support exports, but that water not being exported, correct?
That would be correct.
I think if we could go to page 12, please. Paragraph 24. In this paragraph, you state that figure 4, which we'll show, shows the reduction in the amount of water flowing into Tom Paine Slough for various levels of South Delta exports. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And did the modeling runs you conducted include the benefits of temporary ag barriers?
Yeah, the ag barriers would have been in place in all scenarios.
And did you make any other changes to the model other than reducing the percentage of exports?
I know, just reducing the percentage of exports.
And was it a particular year that you did, or a particular time period?
Yeah, the model was run over, and I don't recall the exact time period, but it's typically we'd run it over a 20 to 30 year period.
And did you also reduce the reservoir releases as you reduced the exports?
I know we wouldn't have done that.
Guess maybe we could go to figure 4. I think that's the next page. Yeah, thank you. So I've got a couple questions as far as for Tom Payne Slough. Is the flow rate into Tom Payne Slough a function of the head difference across the siphon?
That's correct.
So it'd be correct to say that more flow into Tom Payne Slough would be the result of a greater difference?
That's correct.
And if the water surface in Tom Payne Slough, in the Tom Payne Slough side of the siphon is higher, would that result in less flow through the siphon and into Tom Payne Slough?
It would, but we kept that water level constant in the analysis.
And why did you do that?
Because we wanted to look at just the impact from water level changes on the downstream side of the control structure.
Does that reflect actual conditions?
It would reflect the analysis of just looking at the one factor being the water level on the downstream side of the structure. We weren't trying to model what is actually being drawn into irrigation withdrawals within Tom Payne Slough, only what would happen if you change the head on the outside of the structure or the downstream side of the structure.
And did you include the water elevations that support figure 4?
No, I don't believe we included that in our testimony.
Did you compare the water elevations with historic elevations?
No, because we were just using the DSM-2 model to make a comparative analysis of what would happen with a reduction in exports. We wouldn't be able to match it up to reality unless in reality they were reducing the exports at the same exact time that we were reducing it within the model.
And then have you provided the modeling files to the other parties?
I don't believe we have, although they are available if people would like to look at them.
I don't know if it's the appropriate time, but that would be great. I think, I don't know if it's a proper time to request it, but maybe we could do that later, Mr. Bivens, or at the right time.
Let's table that for today.
Sounds
but
great.
I understand.
Moving on to page 15, paragraph 32. In lines 19 and 20, you state that there's been a significant amount of erosion and sedimentation that occurred in the last 15 to 25 years, particularly in the South Delta. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Does that increased sedimentation include Tom Payne Slough?
No, Tom Payne Slough is not showing that much sedimentation, and that's primarily because it's cut off with the control structure from a lot of the delta. And Sugar Cut, which has a low velocity flow component to it, most of the sediment falls out in Sugar Cut before it gets to Tom Payne Slough.
And do you have any analysis or information to show that Tom Payne Slough has not increased sedimentation or has not experienced increased sedimentation?
Yes, we have several surveys that have been conducted over the years.
On page 17, you include figure 5 that compares the forecasted daily EC versus the actual EC observed. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Is there a reason why you chose this particular example from 2018?
I think it kind of highlights the concept that we were trying to get across, that the models have a hard time being able to actually predict what's going to happen when you make a change to the flow in the system. And so, given the fact that DWR had made this estimate of what would happen when they changed the flow due to JPOD, and the fact that the water quality actually decreased rather than increased during the first part of this analysis, shows that you actually have two estimates that are diverging. You got your DSM-2 model that's estimating the water quality going in one direction. You've got reality going in the other direction. Your model isn't even able to correctly predict the trend that's happening to water quality. If they're both going in the same direction, but they're separated by a gap, you might say at least you've got the basic physics down. But when they're going in opposite directions, you're missing some component to the basic physics of the flow process within the South Delta. And that makes me very concerned about the model's ability to evaluate changes to either the exports or other components within the DSM-2 model.
Are you aware of any examples of this happening in more recent years?
I haven't looked through all of the different components or all the different reports that have been provided by DWR. So I'm not sure if this has happened like this in other years. I know I found 6 or 7 examples of this being one of the most obvious ones, but whether or not it's still doing that in later years, I don't know.
Do you believe it's possible that modelers could get better at running these forecasts?
Absolutely. As long as you can update your model to better reflect the physical conditions in the Delta, your estimates and your ability to predict what's actually going to happen will also improve.
Great, thank you. On page 24, paragraph 49. Lines 23 through 24. You state that the barriers hold the incoming tide and reduce the amount of water traveling upstream during the incoming tide. Is that correct?
That's correct.
When the tide is coming in, is that when water users experience issues with water levels?
It can occur at any time of the tide, from what my understanding. But it's probably more pronounced on an outgoing tide when you have a reduction in water levels.
On the next page, 25, lines 1 through 3, you state that although partially effective in maintaining water levels higher than the low tide, water level problems still occur even when the barriers are in and functioning. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Is it your testimony that the water level problems are due to export projects or are due to the project's exports?
The water level project exports result in water level decreases. Whether that's the only function of, or the only process that's causing the reduction in water levels, we don't really know yet. But we do know that exports does result in a lowering of water level within the Delta.
Is it your testimony that the barriers do not fully mitigate water level impacts of the exports at low tide conditions?
That's correct.
Did you conduct any analysis and provide it in this hearing that demonstrates that assertion?
Yes, I did. In my initial case in chief in SDWA 2, we provided
2B or 2 or 2A, what is it?
2A rather, actually.
Sorry.
We provided photographs and a video, which I think has another exhibit number, that shows the channel in Middle River actually drying up on a low tide. So there was an extreme event occurring.
And that was in November, is that correct?
I believe it was, yeah.
Are the temporary ag barriers typically in place in November?
They can be installed and removed at different times of the year.
Well, at that time of the year, at that particular time, were the ag barriers in place?
And I don't believe so.
On page 25, I think we're there still, paragraph 50, lines 6 and 7. You state that once that at one time, I think that's the new way, portable pumps were paid for by DWR, is that correct?
And that's correct.
Are you aware of the circumstances in which DWR paid for those pumps?
I know that part of the water level control plan or response plan, it said that they would go ahead and do some dredging and install pumps if necessary to facilitate irrigators that are having problem withdrawing water from the channels.
You know, I emailed the AHO a couple documents. I don't know if you got them, but if you did, one document in particular is called July 2006 TPS Memorandum. Could we bring that up?
And stand by, our team is looking for that document, Mr. Sutherland.
Is this document an exhibit to something?
No, not yet.
We're gonna have somebody to verify it and be able to cross on it?
We'll see. We'll see if we can get there. Can't really see the whole title page, but Mr. Burke, have you seen this document before?
And no, I haven't.
We go to page 4 of 30 of the PDF.
Hearing officer, I would just make a general objection, and unless somebody's verified this or something, and the witness just said he's never seen it before, I'm not sure what we're doing other than suggesting testimony that's not before the hearing and is not being cross-examined.
When his testimony, he stated that he's aware of that at one point DWR paid for pumps. I'm just trying to get an understanding of his understanding and of the conditions or circumstances in which that was done.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Mr. Sutherland, Mr. Herrick. I'm going to overrule the objection for now, but Mr. Sutherland, keep it brief.
Keep it tight. In the first paragraph of this page, it states that RD 2058 complained about low water levels in the TPS. Do you see that?
I do.
And then going a little bit lower in the second paragraph, it states that it was agreed that DWR would investigate the problem and develop solutions to restore the water supply. Do you see that?
I'm sorry, could you highlight that area for me? Or tell me which paragraph it's on?
It's the second paragraph. It begins at the second sentence, at that meeting.
Oh, okay. Okay, let me read that for a second.
And actually, Mr. Sutherland, let me interject. Is this a DWR report?
It is.
Okay, carry on.
Okay, I've read that.
And then the last sentence of that paragraph, it says that as an interim measure, DWR has provided portable pumps at the slough intake during the summers since 2003. Do you see that?
I do.
Is this the time that you were referring to in your testimony that DWR provided and paid for portable pumps?
No, the time that I'm familiar with was about 2 or 3 years ago. when they were installing pumps out on the levee, pumping water over the levee and into Tom Paine Slough. So I don't know the exact year, but I would say it's probably 2017 to 2020, somewhere in there when they were installing pumps at the slough.
Okay. Just for if we could go to sorry. I think it's page 10 of 30 of the PDF. If you could scroll down to show that table. So I know you haven't seen this, Mr. Burke, and so we'll just try to keep it tight. But the title, as you can see, it says modeling time frame July 26th. My focus is on the little I square and the little I square, where the first one you have no project configuration, no barriers, no SWP pumping, TPS diversions. Do you see that?
I do. I'm not sure what no project configuration means, though.
Yeah. I guess I'd have to establish that. If we scroll up, guess it doesn't say that, does it?
I think Mr. Sutherland, if you're not prepared to establish that immediately, let's move on.
Yeah. I think we're good. I don't have any more questions for Mr. Burke. Thank you.
Very good. And just for the record, we'll mark that as exhibit DWR 008, and Mr. Herrick, you reserve your rights to object to the admission of that document at the appropriate time.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Sutherland. Ms. Mandel Rice, do you have questions for Mr. Burke, and will you be done with them before 5 o'clock?
Never to be done before 5 o'clock, so Mr. Burke can be finished.
Excellent. Please proceed.
If we could go back to SDWA 91, please. Paragraph 10. We're looking at lines 17 through 18, in which you state the project's operation will increase salinity in the South Delta. Did I understand correctly from your testimony that you performed your own modeling of this?
No, we didn't perform our own modeling of that. We took the sites team's models and we ran those models and then evaluated the output from their models to make that conclusion.
And you have not provided those modeling results, correct?
We provided plots of the results for those models in SDWA 91.
What about the raw output?
The raw output is your raw output. It's the raw output that came from the sites project team.
And so the only results that you have been provided.
Well, technically, we reran the models. They provided us models with all the modeling files, and we ran their models. Now, I would anticipate that the output from those models would be the same as the output when they ran their models. So if you're trying to ask whether or not our output differs from their output, I would say it shouldn't, because we use the same exact input files, file by file.
I'm just trying to make sure that all of the parties have all of the information that you're relying upon to make your assessment in this paragraph.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we haven't provided our output files, assuming that they matched the sites team's project output files, but we could provide those if you would like.
And in response to Ms. Chester's questions, you indicated that you did not evaluate the impact of the presumed increased salinity on crops. Is that correct?
That's correct.
In paragraph 10, lines 21 through 22, you state that in periods of increased salinity, the increase, and then you cite a range here of 200 to 400 for extended periods of time. What location are you referring to here?
That would be Old River at Tracy and Sugar Cut were the two examples that we brought into SDWA 91.
Okay, thank you. In paragraph 10, you also state that to evaluate one instance of this degradation, the site's team DSM2 hydrodynamic model was used to evaluate change in salinity at the D1641 Old River at Tracy compliance point. Your testimony does not offer an opinion regarding whether these changes would result in an increased exceedance of D1641 standards at Old River at Tracy, correct?
No, we've only gone so far to say, since those water quality objectives are already being exceeded, any increase in the salinity or degradation of the water quality should increase the amount of exceedances or the frequency of exceedances.
Going to page 7, paragraph 12. You state that salinity can increase periodically. Is that correct?
What line number are you looking at?
I'm sorry, this is paragraph 12.
6 to 8, line 6 to 8.
6. Where it says the result of this increase is exports periodically result in an increase in salinity. So I'm looking at that use of the word periodically.
Not see. Oh, I see. There it is. Okay. 1 second, please. Let me read this. Yeah, in that context, what I'm talking about is that when you review the full period of record that we evaluated, it wasn't a continuous increase of salinity across every day and every month that we evaluated. We saw periodic increases in salinity that would occur from year to year. But it wasn't on a constant frequent basis. It wasn't during high tides or low tides or any type of events that we could correlate to the exports, except that periodically we saw these spikes in salinity within the South Delta area.
Okay, thank you. And have you identified the location of those periodic increases in salinity?
Yeah, we analyzed 3 different locations that I think are shown on. We got a map in here somewhere. Oh, that could be. It's in SDWA 94.
Six maybe?
Yeah, that's it.
I believe it's slide 6 in SDWA 94, the map he's referring to, if that helps.
That does, thank you. Can you identify is there a specific time of year that those periodic increases in salinity occurs, or is it at random?
We haven't actually evaluated that carefully to determine any type of seasonal frequency of those spikes.
Would you agree that the time of the year of an increase in salinity is relevant to the potential impact of that increase?
I do.
Page 8, paragraph 16, and I'm sorry, I don't have the line numbers on this one, but you state that the project operations result in an increase in the South Delta exports. When you say project in the sentence, you are referring to the site's project, correct?
That's correct.
Are you aware the DWR is authorized to divert 7,180 CFS, per day in July through September? I'm sorry, that must be acre feet per day in July through September at Clifton Court Forebay under its U.S. Army Corps of Engineers permit?
I understand that they have different levels of that are allowed to export during certain periods. That's correct.
And so DWR is already authorized to divert the quantity of water that would be rediverted through the South Delta export facilities from the sites project.
It's already within their permit for the Army Corps of Engineers, but the sites project facilitates that by allowing them to store water in sites, which is then rediverted through the South Delta export pumps. So I look at this as
Yes,
being an impact of the project itself.
I understand that, but my question is specific to DWR, which I believe you answered in the affirmative that DWR is already authorized.
That's correct.
Thank you. Going to page 9, figure 3. Looking at this figure, isn't it true that there are times when salinity is lower during the present export conditions compared to the no export condition?
That's true.
And so would you agree that there is not a direct, consistent relationship between an increase in exports and an increase in salinity?
I wouldn't say a direct relationship because the Delta is a very complex place, but overall, the increase in exports results in an increase in salinity in general across the South Delta.
But in some instances here, the present export conditions compared to the no export conditions results in a decrease in salinity.
You can find periods where it does decrease the salinity levels. That's true. Not as much as the increase during other periods of the analysis, but it does happen periodically.
Can you tell me why you selected the 2014 through 2017 period that's shown in figure 3?
I don't really recall why that period was selected.
I am almost done here and I'm mindful of the time. If we could go to figure 5.
Page 17. Yeah. Page 17.
In your testimony, do you suggest a reason for the difference between the actual EC and the modeled EC shown in figure 5?
Yeah, we suggest that the reason that there's a difference in what was projected versus what actually happened is because the model wasn't able to accurately capture the dynamics of the salinity change during that period based on the JPOD exports.
And is there a reason the model wouldn't have been able to accurately capture that?
Our hypothesis is because the bathymetry of the Delta has changed so much, the model is now accurately reflecting some of the flow patterns that are developing within the system.
Aren't there other reasons aside from bathymetry why there could be a difference between modeled results and observed data?
There are a lot of different reasons that could cause that, but the only thing that changed that we're aware of in this particular instance is the exports and the model changing, or the model trying to predict what that change would be from those exports.
Would an unexpected precipitation event potentially cause a difference in model versus observed data?
It would have to be an extreme precipitation event in order to change the actual salinity in the channels. And in July, I wouldn't expect something of that magnitude.
Did you cross-check this figure against the weather data, the precipitation data from this period of time?
No, I didn't.
Going down to page 22, paragraph 43, and these are my last 2 questions, so I will be finished by 5 o'clock. You have talked about a concern about the monthly average issue. Are you aware that when the DSM-2 modeling results are evaluated for D1641 compliance, the results are not averaged over an entire month?
And let me just object. Could you please clarify? You said the modeling for D1641 compliance. What do you refer to when you say that?
When they're looking at whether there will be an exceedance of D1641 compliance requirements.
In a transfer modeling under the water level or water quality response plan?
Hang on, Mr. Herrick, are you making a vagueness objection?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay,
Making that objection, you're trying to help, sorry.
all right. Overruled, Mr. Burke, you can caveat as you need to. Go ahead. You might want to try again, Ms. Mandel-Rice, but
Okay, yeah, could you repeat the question, please?
Are you aware that when the DSM-2 modeling results are evaluated for compliance against D1641, that the results are not averaged over the entire month?
My understanding is that there's a 30-day running average that they use from that daily output from the DSM-2 model that they use to compare to the D1641 requirements. But when they do that averaging over a 30-day period, they're not averaging it over the past 82 years either. They're just averaging it over those 30 days to evaluate whether or not they're complying with the D1641 requirements for that last day of that 30-day period.
But do you understand that that 30-day period is based on the relevant compliance period and it's not a monthly average?
When you say relevant compliance period, what is that?
What they're using there, the 30 days, is not just an arbitrary decision to look at a month. It's based on the compliance period. Do you understand?
That's correct. Yes, I do.
That's all the questions I have. Thank you.
very good. Thank you, Ms. Mandel-Rice. And I believe Reclamation indicated that they would not have questions for Mr. Burke and Mr. Wilson. Is that still the case?
We do not have questions. Thank you.
Very good. And Mr. Herrick, I assume you will have some redirect for your witnesses tomorrow morning.
Yes, I'll suggest the redirect won't be that long, but it could be a half hour at the most. So perhaps my witnesses can be remotely there rather than traveling to my office. Is that all right with the witnesses? And then after that's done, then we'll put on Dr. Leinfelder Miles as the last South Delta witness.
Very good. And with that, we are adjourned and I will see you all tomorrow. Thank you all very much for your time.